what is going on here? Why isn't this being talked about by everybody?
Welcome to the show, everybody. I'm your host, CJ Barnaby. Thanks for listening, and if you have an experience or lifestyle or healing modality you'd like to share with me on the show, email me direct at supernormalize@proton.me. That's supernormalized with a Z at proton.me. Or go to the website supernormalize.com and hit the contact button there. Any way you can, get a hold of me and get your story on the show. In this episode, I talk with the great podcaster Doug from What Magic Is This? We have a discussion on what drew Doug to magic and magical principles. We cover the alienation one feels when young, when presented with a paradigm of living that is almost opposite, if not adjacent, to what one feels in our hearts is true. After this chat, I sat thinking about what Doug had covered. It gave words to the experiences I had also experienced as a child. And then the coincidences in our life paths and some of the books that we both had read was most welcome. I get Doug's angle on his podcast even deeper now. He's truly attempting to normalize the supernatural and magical world that we all love and enjoy through his work. If you haven't listened to it yet, get on over to What Magic Is This on your favorite podcast app, and also go to his website at whatmagicisthis.com. Enjoy. Welcome to Super Normalized. I'm CJ. I'm the host of Super Normalized. On today's show, we actually have Douglas from What Magic Is This? And I'm actually quite honored because I approached Douglas on Twitter and I said, would you like to be on my podcast? He said, yes. And I'm like, whoa, wow, here we are. So welcome, Douglas, to the show.
Well, thank you so much. I am one of those people. I'm not just saying this because I hope it doesn't relativize the experience, but I will appear on pretty much almost anybody's podcast. I love talking about this kind of stuff. Podcasting is my job. And I think that it's one of those things also, I've said that a couple of times while talking to you, but I want everybody to start podcasts. I think podcasts are like just a really wonderful way of doing things. And I don't think it like dilutes what anybody does in any way, shape, or form. I love appearing on people's podcasts. So I'm honored to be with you here, CJ. And I like the way you approach things. I listened to one of your episodes and it was really, oh, thank goodness. So let's definitely have some fun with this one.
Yeah, I like to do it sort of meandering, sort of raw, just like a friendly conversation. And in that, there's always something that comes.
Always, definitely. Thank you for having me here.
Thank you for coming on. So, intro, who are you? I mean, who is Doug?
Oh man, so I'm a near 40-year-old person who had strange experiences growing up that I wasn't able to normalize or situate with the tools that I was given by the paradigm in which I grew up. And so I had very good parents that would foster me with things like stories of myths, and they were never the kind of parents that would ever try to stop me from learning things or even like being who I was. Although later on, a lot of my frustration with experiences and the things that I was interested in, things like ghosts and UFOs and the strange and spirits and all of this kind of stuff. Later on, as I started to grow into what we will call adulthood, my frustration, I think, shifted into things like depression and shifted into an anxiety of my experiences not being able to map onto what I was being told was actually real. So it wasn't until the age of about 21 that I discovered something called magic. or the occult, the Western magical tradition, in which I was finally able to put into a place this energy that I had for wanting to know more about how I don't fit in, how my experiences don't fit in, and so magic became my life. It became one of the biggest parts of my life for the majority of my life, truthfully. But I just didn't have a name for it until I was about 20. So I've been studying magic and the occult, and also my interest in UFOs and the paranormal and supernatural was also a part of what I was doing. And then in 2019, I was feeling. I'll put it this way: I quit drinking. I was addicted to alcohol. I was an alcoholic for. There's no other way to put it. But when one quits drinking, at least I found I was getting quite bored. And I have all of these books and all of this knowledge, and I just really wanted to share. So I needed an outlet in some way that wasn't just like work yourself to death, Doug, because I was working at a museum. So I decided to start a podcast. It was just one of those things where I enjoy listening to podcasts. I wanted to start a podcast. So I did, and it's been fairly fun and successful. And my podcast is what I do for a living. So I'm an extraordinarily lucky person in that, that those strange experiences, the things that I have that I didn't allow me to fit in, I get to share with other people, and other people come to me and be like, I feel this same way, or I feel part of this, Douglas. And it's a really wonderful thing. So yeah, that's what I do. I have a podcast. I talk about weird shit. I talk about the weird shit I've done. I talk about weird shit that I might want to do. And other people tell me about their weird shit. And it's a weird shit fest is basically what's going on in my life.
That's an excellent summary and a beautiful introduction to yourself there.
Thank you.
I can relate to that wholly. Nearly everything you've said there is very similar to my own life, except for I did discover magic when I was young, but it was all what I would call open hand magic, where I believed this would happen, and it would happen if I did it the right way. And I would do strange child rituals when I was very young, which made sense to me and would cause things to happen. And I didn't know what that was. For me, that was just what life was.
Right.
And I felt alienated by all of my friends because I'd try to explain it to them, and they would basically think I was crazy, to put it plainly. And I would step back from that as I got older and push that down. So to cope with it, and obviously you went through the similar thing. I went through a phase of depression as well. On and off, long time, but it was, for me, the depression was more like a numbness to life because I couldn't express myself. And as a part of that non-expression, it felt like life was a pinball machine until I aligned myself more with magical principles that made sense to me. For me, magic and the magical world we live in is my religion. To put it in other words, some people say animism and things like that, but that's still scraping at the edges of it, and it does make sense to me. And over time, it gets more of a vocabulary, and turns into more of a dialogue with the world. And so yeah, I appreciate how you've actually explained that, because to me that makes so much sense to me as well.
I remember, just as a quick aside, one of looking back, one of the starkest moments of realization for me was it was in March of, my gosh, 1994, 95, I want to say. I was in her name was Miss Logan at Springbank Middle School, and we were talking about Indigenous or First Nations Canadian ways of understanding the world, what I would later learn to understand as being an ontology. And they talked about, they used that A word, they used the word, but they didn't say animism, but that's what they were talking about. And she was talking about how the people on the area in which we live, they believe that the Elbow River, which is in Calgary, where we are, they believe that it was alive. And they believe that these trees were alive. And I remember kids kind of like laughing, kind of like snickering to themselves, but I remember very clearly being like, they're right. This is right. Like, that's my understanding. And so that's kind of, I consider that, perhaps I'm looking back with rose-colored glasses, but I consider that like the splitting point, because it's not like it was just this thing, and then I went crazy and then became depressed. But looking back in retrospect, that's kind of the moment where for me it's like, okay, the way that I think and the way that I've experienced things, just like you, like making things out of mud in like swamps and stuff, because I grew out in the rural part of Alberta. I would spend a lot of time alone. I would like make friends, and they would be they were real to me. I would see things that were very, very real, and do things like you that would have consequences. This
Yes.
stuff was real.
Yes.
So that was when I understood, like, there's this way of being in the world that my school is looking back at it and saying, like, I think that what they were trying to do was good, because I was the first generation where they were trying to talk about indigenous ways of understanding,
Mm.
and to people on land that was very obviously belonged to, not belong, but it was where they were beforehand. And so they were trying to make it understandable for us, but the way that it was presented was like, look how silly it is. And then for me, it broke my heart, because it was like this.
Yeah.
That's it to me. That maps onto my world way better. And then it was like a half an hour of class about how they saw the world, and then it was like back to like learning not trigonometry, like mathematics, and like and chemistry, our times tables, and it was just like, oh, this
Yeah.
is not what I want to do.
Oh, yes. Yeah. The education system was quite a mess.
Yeah, I get what that they were trying to do, and again, probably how it's being taught now was way better, but I remember the other kids in the class just thinking it was very weird, and then I was like, that's not weird at all to me.
That's right. Well, I mean, it's just a paradigm thing. The paradigms they've been raised in
Yeah.
makes them blind to what actually really is.
Well, what happened also is that when I finished high school, I became incredibly nihilistic, because I was given a lot of stuff during school, particularly by one teacher in grade 11 who introduced me to Carl Jung, and that kind of reintroduced myself to Charles Fort and Colin Wilson and people like this. But things were stark after I finished high school, and I became like a full blown like fundamental materialist that just thinks that other stuff is kind of interesting. And that was like, when I look at that period of time from 18 to 21 before I discovered magic, that was like one of the most darkest points of my life. I was absolutely rudderless, and that was my solve for this. Like, I realized I'm depressed. I realized I'm not fitting in. And so oblivion and resignation to nothingness was something that seemed appealing. And then, yeah, Discovering Magic, put forth by Grant Morrison, and the Disinformation DVD that was released. That was like, and then my world completely changed. Like that moment is one where it's like, that's where the real split happened, where I decided, was like, no, this other path that I was kind of going down, I'm going to double back, and I'm going to head back to that crossroad and go this way towards the magic and the weird and the crazy stuff.
Okay. So on your journey through all of this, did you actually have any experiences or perform any magic that made your paradigm shift really hard in towards the direction of understanding magic or realizing the power that it has?
Well, yeah, the very first thing that interested me when I just talked about the Disinformation DVD is that Grant Morrison talks about sigils. And he actually takes you through sigils. He's like, what you do is you have a statement of intent. You create a statement of intent, you cross out all of the vowels, you cross out all of the repeating consonants, and then you make a little glyph. It looks like a rune or something like that. And then you somehow launch this, and then it'll happen. And it was like, okay, interesting. But I gave it a shot, because this DVD really, like, it really interested me. I had these incredibly vivid dreams. It was the path that I needed to go down. So I tried a sigil for the first time. Or I actually tried a couple. I tried about 4 in quick succession, and all 4 of them came true within like a month. And these were things that they weren't moonshots like win the lottery or I'm going to be the president of Nicaragua. They were things that like they seemed out of reach for me. Um, and they happened. They and almost like out of the blue. And so that was where my reality really cracked. And it's like, what is going on here? Like why isn't this being talked about by everybody? Like, why is this something that is not, why don't people know this? Like, why do I have to be told on a DVD by some loud, drunk, high Scottish person who happens to be a comic book writer? Why is this guy the guy who's got the key to reality?
Yes.
So that's the thing, that is the moment where those 3-4 sigils that I launched, and then one of them came true. Forget which one it was. One of them came true like almost within days. Like it was striking. And I did nothing. Like it just happened, and it broke my mind. I remember spending, after one of them came true, I remember spending the day where it felt like the entire day I either was having a mental health episode or something was wrong. Like, because it was like nothing I looked at was real. And it was such a strange event. I remember I was spending it with my business partner, and they were driving me around, and I was silent the entire time because it felt like I was on. I've done drugs in my life. This felt completely different. It felt like I know that when I'm on drugs, I'm having a curated experience. This was like, I have no drugs. Everything's broken in the world. My reality is completely shifted. So yeah, the very first time dabbling in sigil magic is when that's where something
Popped.
recognizable as this is very different, and this is very interesting, and there is no going back after this.
Yes, the genie was out of the bottle.
Yeah, no, then it has been, and my life has literally been to try and point at that genie for other people to be like, hey, look, we all kind of have this genie bottle within us to make wishes come true. That's what sigils are. They're, to quote Gordon White, they're wish granting squiggles. They really are. And
that's right. That's exactly right. And I'm hot on sigils too. It's one of the things that started really working for me. I jumped into Gordon's courses as of when he first started, I think, releasing them for members only in, I think, 2016. And
something like that,
yeah. And I straight up, first course was the sigil course, and I tried it. It worked massively for me, and I was very, very happy with that. Prior to that, I was doing a lot of angel magic, and I'd also done the walking of the gates of the planets, and I was pointed towards that by a friend, and I thought, well, look, I'm going to give this a go. It was quite a journey. Every single planet that I did the work with and the angel that turned up blew my mind. I'm actually naturally able to see spirits quite easily, and angels, when they turn up for me, I sense them in all sorts of different ways, and
right.
And they were turning up so readily and so easily, and one of them, Raphael, was like literally excited that I was opening myself up to this sort of thing, and I was like, what? I don't get this. This is actually so ridiculously easy. It was like they were waiting for me to say, yes, you can. You can do this, and it's going to happen. And and as one of my walking of the gates, when I did the gate of the sun, Mikhail turns up and sets off all of the alarms in the whole building. And it was a massive event. Everyone in the building was like, what's going on? And
oh no.
I knew what was going on.
I thought you were meant like in the metaphorical spiritual, but no, at where you were, the alarms all went off.
Yeah, that's right. No,
okay. Nice.
Yeah, because I do find that with it sometimes when I'm doing workings, it bleeds into reality. So much so that events and things happen around me, which is quite interesting and weird. Yeah. So I mean, this pretty much covers that other point I was actually thinking of talking about, which was what do you think requires normalization when it comes to, we were talking about magic. Have you had experiences of other things that are adjacent to magic or connections to the other that you'd like to talk about?
Well, I think I actually, if I can, CJ, I'd like to ask you a question. What does one gain by normalizing this weird stuff. And the reason I'm asking this, and I'm not trying to be combative. I'm Canadian. We're not combative by nature. We're the most pacifistic people on earth, almost like detrimentally so. But something I was hearkening when you put up that as a question, something that Dr. Jeffrey Kripal mentioned while I had him on my show for the first time, it really hit me. In which I said, he's got a title of a book that's called The Supernatural, and I was like, it's natural and it's this stuff is normal. And then he stopped me and he was like, actually, I disagree with you entirely. This stuff is not normal, Douglas. This stuff is not meant to be normal. That's the whole point, is that they're not meant to be normal. Yes, they happen all the time, but that is the most normal thing about them. So I'm wondering, and this is a question that maybe both of us can pull apart, but what happens if we try to start to normalize this kind of thing? What happens if Grant gets his wish and everybody is doing sigil magic? Does it lose something? Does the world get better? Like what happens when we find out that if even half of the things we wish for and use sigils for, as an example, half the things that we do sigils for will come true, the other half won't? That this kind of thing is normal. I want to ask you, what do you think happens if magic is something that is normalized and taught in schools, and we all know that we can do it?
That's pretty much part of my vision. I think what would happen is we'd see the full birthing of Fortean times. So we would walk into a world where all of the experiences that we have are not explained away and shunned. It would actually you'd probably find a lot of people would find more connection by allowing themselves and people to express themselves in ways that, as we see now, is not normal. And these things, I think, this experience of magic, I see us as, and people that understand magic and talk about magic and practice magic, we're basically midwives to this consciousness, which seems to be coming through right now. And a part of that birthing period is that period of darkness where we're all going down the birth canal on the way out, and we're going to pop our heads out into a new reality. And it's definitely happening. I can see that. I mean, I used to be really worried about where the world was going and everything, and I was working with entities in other dimensions that were always adamant, like, look, we know what we're doing, don't worry about it. And so just hold on, it's going to be pretty intense, but you bought a ticket to the ride, you might as well enjoy the ride.
Yeah, there's something that I love the work of Dean Radin, and I've been following Dean basically since, wow, now that I think about it, basically since like 2002. I just got out of high school, and it was one of those things that while I was still like, I'm trying to be the fundamental materialist, I still found, it was when The Conscious Universe was first published. I somehow found it. Anyways, whenever that was. I've loved his work, and he released this book called Real Magic, which I think is a fantastic book, except for one part of this book in which he spends like 3 pages talking about a world in which magic is real, and like that the world considers magic real. And I'm saying this, and if Dean ever listens to this, Dean, I love what you do, but that part of the book, it seemed so ugly to me. And it may just be like this contrariness that I have inside me of like, I enjoy the fact that magic is still seen as being evil. That this normalization of magic in some way, that immediately my hackles go up in some strange way. But it's just this very small part of this book, Real Magic. The rest of the book is brilliant, but I don't know why, for me, and perhaps you can speak on this as well, but for me, I have a somewhat more cynical nature about what happens if we normalize if what is occulted is then now not occulted, and does it lose some of its power? Does it lose some of its grip? And I don't know how to answer that question. It's one of those things where, personally speaking, my show is trying to make this stuff less scary. And so I'm trying to make magic something that everybody on earth should they be interested, want to do. But I also am like, I also say in my podcast, keep magic evil in a way, because I know that people are interested in this kind of thing. But we also, that paragraph, or that couple of paragraphs in Dean's book where he talks about every government having like a department of magic, that makes me want to vomit. And I don't know why. I don't know why I don't, in some part of this, I want it to still be, and this is something I don't have an answer for, and we'll definitely not have an answer for the listeners of this podcast, but I want to be able to understand myself better, and perhaps by talking with you, this will help in a way. But I want to understand what aspect of myself seems so scared that this can be normalized, even though these experiences themselves can never be. I don't think that spiritual experiences will ever be part of, like, I don't think that academia's got any room for what happens once we die. I don't think, like, I think that those are right off the table. We might be able to study them in an anthropological context, but I think that these extraordinary experiences, be they when our sigils first start going correct, when angels start talking to us and start setting off alarms, right? Like, when those things start becoming normalized, does something get lost? Does that make sense to you in some way?
It does. It does. I think maybe that you're also scratching at the idea of, well, what happens when the marketing angle comes in, and we've got,
correct. That's where my cynicism comes
magic,
from.
you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So
yeah.
I can sense that in that. So I do agree with you that that would be an awful tact, and I would also see that maybe as the iconic demiurge taking a hold of it and turning into the plasticized, fantasticized, silicon version of that, which would be very, very awful. And I mean, we've already seen partially that with all our devices that we carry around. I mean, I feel like a damn magician every time I pick up my tablet, because I can do anything with it basically in the universe but magic, because I mean, I can use it for looking up things to read, to do magic. But again, it's a disconnection in some way, because you are actually using an interface which has been, described to us and handed to us from whatever it is that makes this reality. So stepping outside of that, I think that you are right there in some ways, that there will always be some sort of veil between normality and supernatural. But I still want to invite it in anyway to see what happens, because we've seen how awful materialism has been, and the head trauma of Cartesian understanding. It hasn't helped. And I went through a similar materialist sort of phase when I was younger, and I was sitting on the edge of magic, but also very scientific and rationalist, and trying to explain so many things away. And it didn't work in the end. And
No.
It actually made me feel more hollow. And I did literally get attacked by a wizard spirit of some sort, and it shook my world to the ground, because I didn't believe you could get possessed.
Right.
Until you're possessed, and then you're like, well, actually I am possessed, then I have to now I've got to kick somebody out. But it does change everything when you realize that the world is made of spirits, and you're basically swimming in a soup bowl of spirits, and everything around you is influenced and changed and actioned by them. So, when you're drawing those sigils out, they're looking over your shoulder going, oh, he wants that to happen. Okay.
Right. I mean, I don't want this to sound like Doug's greatest hits, but another thing I like to tell people is that I think that we are the ghosts. I think we're the temporary part of this exchange that we have. Like, we're the spirits in the world of spirit, because this flesh and blood thing is fun. I don't go for that whole like meat suit, like I'm a meat spirit in a meat suit thing. Like, I think this part of the experience is like a wonderful part of the experience. It's not the whole thing, but this is a good thing. But I also want to remind people, like, I think that in the world of spirit, this part is the temporary part. We are truly the ghosts in this at this point. It's just that we've been shown a really, really poor version of like how to understand them. We've been shown like the worst version of the spirit paranormal TV stuff that you see at 4 o'clock on what used to be called like the Learning Channel. Like we have such a bad way of being able to put this experience of this temporary experience of spirit, um, to portray, to give people not just things like hope, but to make us understand that there's other agencies around. And yeah, they're doing the things that you said as well, CJ. They are looking over the shoulder all the time at what you've got scribbled there. They are the ones that are showing up and saying like, hey, we're here. It's easy to see us sometimes. You just have to kind of shift things. So
That's right.
yeah,
That's right.
I really do think that, and there is something humble to say. There is a humbling, I think, that occurs when we say like we are the spirits, we are the ghosts, but it all seems to get lost in the fuzz right now of, I think a lot of people think of a commodification of spirits and a commodification of magic in which it all gets put into like a supermarket, and you're like, I'm going to call this demon up and this spirit up, and that kind of stuff is obtainable, and that kind of stuff is a way of doing magic. But I also think that just be like, calm down, they're everywhere.
Yes.
Calm down, they're everywhere. It's actually much easier than you think, and
That's right.
it doesn't require you to have every single implement made at the hour of this and this and that. If that does help, then that helps you. But there's very simple ways of doing it. It's as easy as going to a park and just tuning out the cars driving by and the people yelling at each other or into their phone and hearing the birds. The birds are there. Birds are everywhere. You just don't hear them because there's other noises that are louder. The same thing happens with spirits. It's just calming other things so that the other stuff comes through. Anyways, tangential, but there we go.
So, Doug, in your learning journey, was there any key books that really kicked you on the way, got you really noticing and going, "Whoa, that's it."
So the biggest spiritual experience I had reading a book was Cosmic Trigger by Robert Anton Wilson. Cosmic Trigger was the one that completely broke. So when I mentioned that I had, there's that disinformation DVD that was put out. For people that don't know, there was a company that was a website and a publishing company called Disinformation. It was started by Richard Metzger and a few other people. They had a conference that occurred in, I believe, 2000, in which they invited a whole bunch of people to talk on a stage for like 12 hours or a couple of days. It was like 24 hours, 12 hours split up over 2 days. Anyways, they recorded it and they released it on a DVD that was part of a TV show that Disinformation had. That was they showed 1 or 2 episodes on, I believe, Channel 4 in England, and then they were like, "This is too much." It's great that those TV episodes are great, but the DVD also included the second disc. That's where Grant Morrison was speaking about sigils. But another person that was there was Robert Anton Wilson. And the reason I watched his thing was because Grant Morrison said, like, at the beginning of his speech, like, we're all here. We've all read Robert Anton Wilson, and we're all making this stuff real. Isn't that crazy? And so this guy who I enjoyed him talking about magic referenced this other guy who speaks later on, Robert Anton Wilson. I should probably listen to him. And Robert Anton Wilson started talking about, for those of you who've read my book, Cosmic Trigger. So I was like, okay, I should probably find Cosmic Trigger. And I found it I was living where? I was living in Calgary right before I was Calgary, Alberta, about to move up to Edmonton, Alberta. And somehow I got a copy of this book. I don't know from where. I wish I did, but this book completely broke my head. It was one of those ones where, yeah, I was 20 years old, and this book shattered me. It had everything that I'd kind of like. It appealed to that slowly crumbling materialist, in which, he talks about cryogenics for defeating death. He talks about the JFK assassination and conspiracy and things that I really love. So he was speaking the language of a 20-year-old person who's dissatisfied with the world he sees. Yes. But then there's also, oh, by the way, I did Aleister Crowley rituals and talked to aliens, and they told me that Sirius has sent aliens. It completely shattered everything to me. And that book was so definable about well, if doing the sigil stuff was like there's no going back, the reading Robert Anton Wilson's book was like, well, now like this is really how I have to conduct myself for the rest of my life. And the way that conduct myself by meaning like not that I'm just going to do a bunch of drugs and Aleister Crowley rituals, but more so like staying curious, always trying to see what is like behind the veil, but not for explanatory finality, but just part of this journey, this wondrous journey.
Mm.
So I have tried to go back, and it was funny, but yeah, that book is the big one. That book for me is huge. I think I read that book 8 times in 1 year. Like I just kept rereading
Ooh.
it. I just kept rereading it.
Yeah.
My copy is it's buried, but yeah, it's it's dog eared, and I've gone through with like
You did the
highlighters, notes in the
experiments.
book. Yeah, yeah, and so that was a big one. And then as I was in that mix of rereading Cosmic Trigger over a period of a year, I also read Alan Moore's book From Hell, which is
Mm.
about Jack the Ripper. It's a comic book about Jack the Ripper, and it goes through this Masonic conspiracy of Jack the Ripper being a ritual. The murders, Jack the Ripper murders being a ritual by a insane doctor who might think that gods of magic are talking to him. That's a really short part of it, but I think the one-two punch of Cosmic Trigger and then kind of like the deep conspiratorial dark history of beliefs that's portrayed through Alan Moore's From Hell. That's really, yeah, those two books, they shattered a lot for me. And what's interesting about From Hell is that he's got an appendices in there that's almost as engaging as reading the comic book itself. So Alan Moore does this really wonderful job of showing you how he creatively took the history of what this author said and combined it with this author. So in a way, it was like this experiment in creativity and how to be really creative with history and storytelling, but
Oh,
how
brilliant.
also stories are in a way almost like a spell in and of themselves. So yeah, those two books really shattered me, but I don't think I will ever read a book that will change my world as much as Cosmic Trigger did.
Right, right. But I understand that myself. I actually read Cosmic Trigger way back when, and it was one that twisted my world in just the right way. But I was also picking up Terence McKenna at the time. That's when Terence
Yeah.
McKenna was just starting out. And one of the first books I picked up was Archaic Revival, and that just rocked my world completely as well. So these things all worked together at the time for me. And then also at the same time, I picked up Carlos Castaneda, and that just was paradigm shaking to me as well. It made me think, oh wow, okay, there is a new thing that is an old thing, which is an important thing that we should all be doing, and that's where I really started to branch out into understanding spiritual angles to life rather than being so caught up in the material. And yeah, literally at that stage, I found all those books to be very formative towards making it okay for me to experience what I was experiencing, because I already had so much contact with spirits and angels and ghosts and aliens sort of thing turned up. And to me, that was all normal. And
Right.
to read these books was like, oh, okay. So I'm not crazy. This is just what happens.
Mhm.
So I appreciate that angle. That's perfect. And that book, Cosmic Trigger, was brilliant. He's such a great writer.
It is, and I'm not going to shock anybody by saying that it's dated. It is an atrociously dated book, and here's the thing: I might have read it 8 times in 1 year, but I think what book I've actually read more is the second book, which is Cosmic Trigger 2: Down to Earth, which is what happens after you've had all of these crazy experiences. I really wish people, and for those listening, if you loved Cosmic Trigger but you haven't read the second book, the second book is genius. I actually think the second book is the best of the books. I'm one of those Godfather 2 people, but with the Robert Anton Wilson. I think Down to Earth is actually the more important of the trilogy, because people forget that it is a trilogy and there's 3 books, and the third one deals mostly with the death of Robert Shea, who was the co-author of Illuminatus. with Robert Anton Wilson, which is okay. Meh. But Cosmic Trigger 2 Down to Earth is, if people have read Cosmic Trigger 1 but they haven't checked out Cosmic Trigger 2, I implore you, please pick it up, because as wonderful as it is to stay with the crazy stuff and Sirius and aliens and all of this, the JFK assassination, Down to Earth really is a perfect title. And it really is like, we have to somehow, once you've been through Chapel Perilous, what do you do with this information, and how does this become part of your life, and how do you look back at how the things that got you to those moments, how do you onboard that in a way that is healthy and helpful to other people? And so I've read the second book more than I've actually read Cosmic Trigger 1. So yeah, it's this Cosmic Trigger broke everything down to earth in a way, kind of put it all back together in a very interesting context, because he brings in a lot more Reichian ideas into Down to Earth that were absent for the most part. He kind of introduces Wilhelm Reich in the first Cosmic Trigger, but he doesn't really talk about how Reichianism helped him until the second book. So yeah, that's my pitch.
Okay.
Cosmic Trigger, very dated. Cosmic Trigger 2, not dated at all. Really, really good. And yeah, it's a good trilogy. I really enjoy that trilogy. It does, the trolleys do fall, the wheels fall off the trolley by the third one. But I do think that it's worth, if you're going to read one of them, you should read all of them.
Okay. I don't think I've actually read it, so I'm definitely going to pick that one up. So
it's good. It's really good. Don't expect to have your paradigm completely broken like the first one. What you are seeing is a person who, spoiler alert for people, Robert Anton Wilson's youngest daughter was murdered. And that's how the first Cosmic Trigger ends. Is him talking about how he believes his daughter can be saved through cryogenics, and he's very optimistic about being able to see his daughter again. And this first book is basically, which was written more than a decade after Cosmic Trigger 1 was. I believe he's living in Ireland at that point in the late 80s or early 90s. It's just him being resigned to the fact that he's never going to see his daughter again. I've lost this kind of hope, and that's how he got brought back down to earth. So, for the younger listeners and people wanting to get into magic, all of the stuff that CJ and I have been talking about, this wonderful experience, is all good. But unless you have some way of coming back down to earth and onboarding that information in a very helpful way and being able to share it with other people so that they don't think you're crazy, you're really not doing good. I'm just going to say you're not doing the good that you know within your heart. So yeah, everybody should read Down to Earth.
No, I definitely will read that one now.
Yeah.
So we're actually going through times of, the great revealing, otherwise known as apocalypse. And during these apocalyptic times, you may have had some messages or tips or ideas that you'd like to express about how to deal with them. What's a good way to live through this? Is there anything that you'd like to share that you think works?
Yeah, I truly think, and I don't want this to sound supercilious, but I think kind of what I've done with my show and the main message that I think my podcast has, because people that listen to my show are mainly people that are like, I don't get a lot of people who are really versed in magic listening to my show. And in fact, a lot of people who really like magic and have been doing it for a very long period of time in a ritual sense, a lot of them actually don't like my show. A lot of them, for one, it's introductory. They already know this information. So a lot of them, I don't get a lot of feedback from people that are really versed in magic for my podcast. A lot of people are either just really curious about it, or they're people that are starting out, or they're just they think that I have a sexy voice. Truthfully, and I'm not just saying that, but I think that one of the reasons that my show is it's successful. I'm not making billions of dollars off of my show, but it is what I have to do for a living. A lot of the people who are curious and they are only curious in magic for like 6 or 7 months, and then they'll write me just being like, thanks, I liked your podcast. I looked into it a little bit, um, but it's not for me. But I just wanted to let you know, Douglas, that I think what you're doing is kind of cool. And for a period of time there, I thought it was really interesting. And I just say, I write them back and I tell them more than anything, stay curious. Just stay like if you get one message from my show, it is stay curious. So
Mm.
I think when times get really interesting, because I just want to jump on what you're saying. And I'm not saying this to relativize apocalypse, but I really do think that everything is in a state of apocalypse. Everything is in a state of ruination, and that's just how these things occur. There's progress, and then there's falling into decrepitness and debauchery and all of these kind of things. And I don't want people to read into my words here. I am truly not trying to relativize what is occurring in places that are truly struggling. But this idea that that there's no hope, I think, is one that as a through line to Robert Anton Wilson, perhaps the greatest thing that one should take from Robert Anton Wilson is this optimism, and to know that as bad as things are, your curiosity and you being able to seek out and stay in a way open to the suggestion that you don't know everything and that you will never know anything, and resigning yourself to the fact that you will never know anything, everything, and that people that seem to say that they know everything on organizations, whether they be governmental or your Wicca Lodge or this kind of thing, if they think that they have a monopoly on truth, know that they do not. And it's okay, because you don't have to take everybody's opinions and the things that they say on board and make it your unbendable truth. I loved in Jeffrey Kripal's newest book, he says that truth is relative, not because there is no truth. It's because so many things are true. And that is like when I read that in his newest book, and of his work, I think his newest book is maybe one of my least favorites, but it has some of the greatest one-liners that he's ever written. And that one to me really struck home. And it's such a simple term. There are so many, we are swimming in truths right now. And it's getting tough for us to be able to see what truths one holds to be sacrosanct. And I say that by maintaining the curiosity and maintaining the mystery of life, and to let go of certainty of absolutely everything, and particularly even through something like explanatory finality, you do truly go into this area in which CJ was talking about, with this Fortean existence, this point in history in which experience of truth is more important than explanation. And the best way of doing that is to be curious about absolutely everything. And I'm not trying to get the people to log on to some kind of like Abby Hoffman-esque, like, fuck you, always ask questions about everything. That's part of it. But a curiosity is a way of being able to see the world that is both childlike and with a gift of newness, and not to take it as a blunt object to be used for absolutely everything until you find something else that speaks a greater truth to you. Just be curious, truly. And that's I think the thing that attracts a lot of people to my show, and it has kept me sane in moments where the world has looked like it is going to utter ruination. I just remain curious, and I know that yeah, truth truly is relative, because there's so many things that are true.
So many possibilities and so many truths.
Yeah.
I could actually see that as a book title. Be curious, stay curious,
Yeah.
remain curious. I could see that one coming out. That would be awesome. Okay, so is there any other thing that you'd like to cover today? Is there any questions that you would have liked of me to have asked?
No, I think we've covered a wide gamut. I mean,
Yeah.
besides trying to convince people, read Cosmic Trigger 2. Cosmic Trigger 1's great. Cosmic Trigger 2 is wonderful. It's actually been a while, and it's one of those things that I see Robert Anton Wilson's work coming up a bit more again these days, and he tends to ebb and flow, and his interest, I think, was back in like 2016. People were really into Cosmic Trigger again, and so I think that I think his work is due for a reevaluation. Although it's one of those things where I've read every single thing that he's written in book form, including his really shitty movie script called "Reality Is What You Can Get Away With." Um, he's an interesting guy. I still love him. There was a period of my time. There was a period of my life, and I'm sorry if I just like this is the Robert Anton Wilson show of super normalized. Um, but there was a period of time where I earnestly thought I would have been maybe 21 or 22, where it was like, no author will speak to me more than Robert Anton Wilson. Nobody will have a better grasp of reality than Robert Anton Wilson. And I've very much found out when you start going through the people that he mentions in his books that that's not true. He's just really good at writing about other people's ideas. But yeah, that's basically it. I think that also kind of just ties back to what I'm saying is like, just keep away from a monopoly of having one or two. If your sources for reality can be counted on your fingers and toes, then that's not a good thing. Your beliefs are everybody's beliefs, my beliefs, your beliefs, everybody's beliefs are very liquid, and we're getting to that point that Fort was talking about. And this all of this kind of stuff is is going to be becoming a lot more experiential. And so, yeah, there is an apocalypse. There is one. You're lucky you're here.
Yeah, that's
I'm
right.
lucky to be here. We're lucky to be in this, and not in like a that I see death everywhere. Death has always been an aspect of life.
That's right.
Um, I think I do think more than anything, soapbox time from the necromancer. I do think that we are very death phobic, particularly in the West. I had a guest on my show who eventually became my girlfriend, and we were talking about taboos. And I said in that episode, I still think the biggest taboo that we have in the West is death. And so
Yes.
I think over the last 5 years, the specter of death has been very prevalent for people, and for good reason. So I think that the very first thing, more than anything, is take it from the necromancer. Start thinking about death, thinking about your demise. Know that the story and the apocalypse continues even without you here, and that also, I think, looking into what folks have to say about what happens after death, I think is a very important thing. It's a scary subject to broach, but
Mm.
I'll put it here's I'll tag it on. Stay curious. ... about death. There we go. Where we'll put it there.
Yeah, that's excellent. I mean, I've got to say that that's exactly true. In that, first of all, for myself, I've noticed that on YouTube, the Argo's been throwing a lot of NDE type videos for me. I mean, I've always been interested in death, and it made me quite gothic as a young person. And I wouldn't say I'd been afraid of death until I was possessed really severely, and the threat posed by the demons that were working me over became very existential. But then since that, I came to terms with death in a different way, and it made me go, okay, now I'm stronger. And death doesn't it sort of matters to me, but doesn't matter. And I'm not going to make light of it. I mean, it's an intense thing that happens to people and their families. Yet in some cultures, it's celebrated as the passing over. That, well, you just opened the door. That's the next stage. So good on you. However, in our society, as you say, yeah, the death phobia is pretty much what has driven a lot of the awkward sides of the way the world has been lately. And I think that, you know, as we embrace spirits and the fact that well, I see it as a fact that when we cross over, that's just an extension of ourselves. Yeah, I wholly see that embracing of that understanding will change everything in a more positive way. Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah, it's this can be put in such a bad way and twisted in such a bad way, but death in a way kind of is like an answer, and not an answer for an explanation, but a looking and a way of being able to sit well with death is a great thing. And somebody who recently passed away, who's I wouldn't say a hero, but he's a very important thinker by the name of Jake Stratton Kent. Wrote for Scarlet Imprint, wrote for Haitian Press. A wonderful person, but he truly says that. And I'm paraphrasing greatly here. And Jake, you're welcome to throw some object, a teacup, at me from the other side. But like, magic, a personal magical practice is actually a way of grappling with a personal eschatology, which eschatology is the ideas of what happens after the apocalypse, or what happens for a revelation. And a personal, and I truly do believe that a magic, as much as it is about drawing circles on the floor, or even lighting candles and making bags of with graveyard dirt and silver in it, it's all part of you being able to grapple with that answer of what you think happens when you join the great majority, right? And so yeah, it's I'm prejudiced. I like, a lot of my magic comes from death, but in a way, I do think that as a solve, nothing scares people more than talking about death. Nothing ends a conversation quicker than talking about death. Let's get away from that. We need to get away.
Yeah.
We should be talking about death as much as we used to talk about the new episode of Seinfeld. I'm
Yes.
dating myself greatly, but I remember a time where the day after any Seinfeld episode happened, everybody talked about it for the rest of the day after. But I think we should at least a couple of times a month should all just talk about death.
Yeah, I totally agree. Totally agree. Yeah, we need to actually normalize that death is a process, and it's a healthy process. And yeah, I even sometimes think that maybe on the other side, there's a group of people doing a seance and summoning us, and this is what reality is for us. So,
hey, I like that.
yeah. So, Doug, where can people find you?
They can head to whatmagicisthis.com. There is my website. Now, the reason I list my website first is that one of the things that I do and I spend a lot of time on is that my episodes are mainly introductory and they're about topics, right? My show, the topic is first, the guest is second for those episodes where I do have guests. But the reason I mentioned the website is that if you go to the website and you click on the episodes and you look at anything that's interesting to you, I also give a ton of show links and show notes to what I'm talking about. But yeah, you can listen to all the episodes there on my website. But if you want to use Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, I don't even know if people use Stitcher anymore. Anyways, I'm on pretty much every podcast platform. You can find my stuff there. If you like what I do, come on to the Patreon. Wow, that was the worst pitch I've ever done. Come on over to the Patreon. For $7 a month, you get basically a whole different podcast. I do as much content on my Patreon as I do for my regular podcast, and I go a little bit deeper, and you can see a little bit more of what I think about magic and my opinions on magic, and just fun things to try out. That's the thing. I try to not to make this stuff too scary. I show you how to draw a magical circle on the floor with like fabric and chalk. Like, it's very easy. Yeah, I'll just put it that way. But you can find me everything is whatmagicisthis.com. But if you just want to listen to my voice and talk about some strange stuff, any podcast player will have it. But yes, everything, whatmagicisthis.com. Also on Twitter, barely on Facebook, barely on Instagram. For the most part, my Twitter account is me just kind of throwing up things that I find funny. And every once in a while, there'll be like a funny wiener dog video or something like that. But I don't fight people on Twitter. I'm not trying to tell people what they're doing with magic is wrong. My Twitter account is really just like, that looks interesting, I'm going to share it. But all of those things are available at whatmagicisthis.com.
Brilliant. So you don't participate in the fray, you just get on with life.
Yeah, man. It's funny because, again, I don't want us to sound self-aggrandizing. I read Marshall McLuhan from a very early age, and a lot of his stuff is incomprehensible, but truly the medium is the message is such a platitude these days, and everybody's saying it. But he is as prophetic as one can get. And truthfully, if people listening to this podcast, give yourself a week to go through the work of Marshall McLuhan, your world will be shattered. The man was a prophet. And yes, some of the stuff that he talks about is very dated, and the way that he talks is very 1940s, 1950s. But my goodness, it's like, oh, here's a blueprint for how everything's going right now as far as how we communicate with each other using technology. It's stunning. Twitter, the medium is the message. How much can you say in 2 sentences?
That's right.
Usually it's yelling. That's all. So Twitter, I'm just like, well, I'm gonna use this to share this crazy Byzantine mosaic that somebody else shared. They took a picture of in Istanbul, and that to me is the best use of Twitter. I'll just put it that way.
Cool. Yeah, completely agree. Okay, Doug, thank you very much for coming on the show. I really appreciate your time. It's been awesome talking to you. And I look forward to talking to you more in the future. And
definitely.
I'm now a Patreon member, so I'm also looking forward to hearing the extra content.
Thank you.
Yeah, and everything you do. I mean, I've been listening to you since 2019.
Really? What?
Sorry, 2020, I should say.
Okay.
So and from the start, I was like, it's so approachable. I can hear it. The way that you present yourself in the world is so approachable, and for me, that's broken open, new ideas and new understanding. And I've really enjoyed that. So thank you very much for coming.
Oh, CJ, this has actually been one of my. I really enjoyed what we talked about, and it's been a lot of fun. And yeah, it's fun to go through some of these memories, particularly of Robert Anton Wilson. And yeah, I love the guy, and it's been an absolute blast. And yeah, definitely, I'd be overjoyed to come on back because this has been so much fun.
Excellent. Thanks, Doug. Okay. All right. Bye for now.
Ta-ta.